Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. This is Njoki and Associates Advocate. Today, we shall be having a discussion on data protection for churches. My name is Elizabeth Njoki. I am joined by my colleague, Anita Kamau. So feel most welcome. It's going to be an interactive session. Today's conversation is on an interesting topic, the issue of data protection, which has been in the recent past been a hot topic, especially in the spaces of organizations. And one of the areas that probably most people have not been looking at as far as data protection is concerned, the issue of privacy, the issue of data rights, has been churches. We have seen, following the Data Protection Act of 2019, that's when all this, they call it hula balu on data protection started in Kenya. And the Office of the Data Protection Commission has been putting some organizations in the spotlight. We have seen some organizations being fined. We have seen some companies like credit organizations also being, slapped with very hefty fines for breaching data protection laws. We have seen other organizations on the spotlight, like NIVAS, when there was a data breach. So, and we thought it necessary today to have a conversation on where does the church fall with regards to this data protection conversation. And we have seen most of these organizations, we are not awakened to the need or how these laws affect us until we are the victims. Yeah. So until we hear that a school was fined 50 million, schools will not realize, oh, we are subject to the Data Protection Act. Until a club is fined for exposing people's images without their consent, clubs don't realize they don't realize, oh, you mean that we are also subject to these data protection laws. So there has been need for a lot of sensitization, for a lot of capacity building, for a lot of sensitization and awareness on what exactly is this data protection, what exactly are the data protection principles, what exactly is the data protection all about, and how does it affect us as individuals, as organizations. Before I continue, I'm just going to allow Anita, my colleague, to introduce myself. Karibu sana, Anita.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anita Kamau. I'm a trainee advocate at Njoki Associates. And together with Njoki, my colleague, we will take you through the presentation on data protection and how it's applicable to the churches. I look forward to a very fruitful engagement with all of you. Karibuni.
All right. Thank you so much, Anita. So the first thing that we would want to understand is, where does this issue of data protection stem from? What comes to mind when you see that photo? Throw in your thoughts on the chat section. All right, Andrea says chat service, another one says intense worship. All right, I'll go with that. But from the look of that photo, it's clear that's someone in church. They're worshiping. They probably didn't even know when this photo was being taken. Chances are 100% they did know that this photo was being taken. And I got this photo from the internet. So how it got there, the chances are they didn't know that their photo was actually on the internet. What you see there is a church membership record book. I'm sure for most of us, for those who belong to churches, if you're a member of a church, there is a record that the church keeps indicating your name, where you come from, a membership record. So this is trying to help us see how churches are affected or fall under the purview of the Data Protection Act. Understanding data protection, you must first understand where we are coming from, and the constitutional basis of data protection is Article 31 of the Constitution, which provides for the right to privacy. So the whole conversation about data protection, the root of it is the right to privacy, which protects anyone's information from relating to themselves or their own private affairs from being unnecessarily required or revealed. You can see that I would underscore required or revealed. So if I am asking you for your name, already the issue of the right to privacy already even kicks in. Like, why are you asking? Because I'm requiring you to give me your name, where you come from, your telephone number, your email. So not just only being revealed, but anyone asking you for your personal information, already the question of the right to privacy kicks in. And so the Data Protection Act came into force in 2019. And the purpose of the Data Protection Act was to give a legal framework for the implementation of the right to privacy, the constitutional right, or to give effect to the constitutional right under Article 31, that is the right to privacy. And the purpose of the act is it establishes the office of the Data Protection Commissioner, and also to make provision for the regulation of processing of personal data, to provide for the rights of data subjects and obligation of data controllers and data processors. The Data Protection Act mainly concerns data controllers and data processors. We are going to see later on how a church fits into that definition of a data processor and a data controller, therefore bringing it under the purview of the Data Protection Act. That is our data commissioner, Madam Kasait. For us to understand data protection, we need to understand some key definitions. When you talk about personal data, what comes to mind? What do you think is personal data? What do you think is personal data? Okay, let me stop sharing my screen so that I can see what you think. What is personal data according to you? Geoffrey is saying any and all pieces of information that identify an individual, any information that discloses who I am to the public. Just give me an example. When I say that my name is Elizabeth Njoki, that is a name that identifies me. When I say I come from this place, that is what identifies me. When I say that I am a lawyer, that is an identity or an identifier of my identity, or rather, that's an element of something that identifies who I am. So what would be important to note is that as far as the Data Protection Act is concerned, personal data relates to you as a person. Information that identifies George Joroge, information that identifies Anita Kamau, not information that identifies your church or an organization. So what I'm saying is that it relates to natural persons. Natural person is you and me. Every other entity is called a legal person or a legal entity. Having looked at the first key definition is personal data. The other key definition is a data subject, which have said is a natural person, an identifiable natural person. Now, a data controller is defined as a natural or legal person, public authority, agency, or other body that determines the purposes and means of processing personal data. Any person who in their position is in a place to determine the processing of your name, of your ID number, and any other personal data relating to natural persons. Now, are you seeing how a church now becomes a data controller? And then there's a data processor. The data processor is now the person who is actually in the act of processing data. And processing data could be collecting, could be transferring, and doing any other act on that data. When you receive names of your members, where they come from, what you do with that church record book, members record, whatever you do with that, whether it is using that information to disseminate information or communication to your members, or just processing it, creating a database, whatever business, whatever action you do with that set of data that you collect from your church members, or whatever data that your chat leaders collect from you, that is called data processing. So the actual action that is done on that data is what is called data processing, and the person who does that is a data processor. There is also what we call sensitive personal data, what relates to your racial or ethnic origin, your political opinions, your religious or philosophical beliefs, trade union membership, all this genetic data, health, biometric data, your fingerprints, your iris, your sex, all that. So I would like to show you here a pictorial representation to help you understand the difference between just mere personal data and sensitive data. Yeah, so that's your name, your phone number, your birth certificate, location. That's just in the general category of personal data, just general identifiers. But sensitive data now comes to sensitive issues like your health status, your biometric data, ethnicity, whether you're married or not. We need to understand the principles of data protection so that when we are talking about data protection in chat, we are able to understand what principles are we applying in ensuring that the privacy of the congregation is protected, the confidentiality of the information of that we are receiving from our members is protected. There are several principles of data protection, and that circle there just highlights them. There's lawfulness, fairness, and transparency, purpose limitation, data minimization, accuracy, storage limitation, integrity and confidentiality, and accountability. And let's take through each and every one of them and what that means. Lawfulness, fairness, and transparency means that personal data is being processed in a way that is lawful, fair, and transparency. That means that you must have a legal basis for collecting data. When you are collecting, or when your church leaders are collecting information about you at the registration desk, when you're coming in and, they tell you, oh, karibu sana, write your name here, your phone number, your email address, where you come from, whether you're a visitor or not, all that information, there must be a legal basis for it to be lawful, okay? And some of the lawful basis for data collection or processing could be, number one, consent. Consent means that I, Njoki, I have said, yes, you can take my name. Yes, you can record my phone number. Yes, you can take my pictures. You can post my pictures on your Facebook page. So I have expressly given you permission to do all that, that you want to do with the information that you're collecting from me. And also I've consented to you taking that information from you. So the consent is one of the lawful bases. Then there are also other lawful bases for processing data. Could be legitimate interest. Legitimate interest could be for a business to run, a normal business to run. There is data that is needed just for the usual operation of that business to take place. Now, even when it comes to a church, legitimate interest means what are the purposes, objectives, what are the affairs of this church as an organization? We are preaching the gospel. So by preaching the gospel, maybe part of preaching the gospel means we need to come to your house to pay what's called pastoral visits. The pastor needs to come to your house, pray for you. It's part of the church affairs. It's part of the church operations. So that's a legitimate interest. So I'm taking your name so that I know the pastor understands where you live, so that when we are doing pastoral visits, we know where we're going to. Could be communication purposes for us to be able to communicate to you the activities of the church and so on. Contractual necessity is information or data processing relating to contracts. Maybe you're an employee of the church and you have to get into an employment contract with the church. That would require the processing of your data. That's part of contractual necessity. If we're entering into a contract, it's just needful that I get your name, I get your information, your ID number, and all that. The other one is legal obligation. Legal obligation is what the law requires, as whether or not the data subject has given their consent or not. If the law requires that the church provides this information, maybe to an authority, then that is a legal obligation. For instance, maybe the churches are registered under the Societies Act. Maybe the Registrar of Societies needs a list of the members as part of the compliance with the act. So that does not even need the consent of the church members or the person who, or the data, we call them the data subjects. Huh? So that is an example of legal obligation where the law demands. Vital interest could come in where the life of the data subject is concerned. Yeah. Now one of the data processing activities is even transfer of information. If I am transferring my church members' information to a third party, that transfer constitutes data processing. All right. Think, for instance, if a member of your church gets sick and the church has to organize for this person to be taken to hospital, they are not in a position to, the person who is sick is not in a position to even talk or just do anything by themselves. So if maybe this person got sick within the church, maybe within the church service or church premises or just, and we have to get help, help for you, medical help for you. If you're taking you to the church, to the hospital, and the hospital requires the name of this person, maybe next of kin, because next of kin is personal data. In fact, that is sensitive personal data and all that information. I, as the church member or the church leader, I am giving this information to the hospital without the consent of the church member. But you see now, this is a vital interest. It is your life that is at stake. So that is a lawful basis. Public interest is in the interest of matters that affect the public, like say security. So there's a time there was this issue of Mimbakumi. If you were to apply the same concept to churches, then maybe there is need for purposes of security, for maybe the people around to understand where these church members come from, the area you're coming from, for purposes of, say, security. Those are the elements of lawful basis for processing data. So the next principle is purpose limitation. Purpose limitation means that you have to limit the purpose for data processing. You have to, the reason as to why you are collecting and processing this data must be specified, all right? If you're taking my name, there has to be a purpose as to why you're taking my name, all right? Data and processing it. So data processing is purpose specific, and the church must have, clear stipulation and guidelines as to the purpose for which they are collecting every kind of data. The other one is data minimization. Now, having defined the purpose for which you are processing this data, you must limit data to that which is necessary to accomplish that purpose, all right? If we are talking about, for instance, maybe a purpose that is necessary for church, yeah? Maybe it's just to know your members, all right? Because it's important for you to know the church, it's important for them to know their members. So if the purpose is to know who my members are, or what in other spheres is called know your customer, KYC, do I need to get information about your allergies? If I just need to know who you are, your name is so-and-so, is it necessary? Is your medical or data about all your allergies, is it necessary for the purpose of knowing you or who you are? Or if I'm asking your KRA PIN. So in looking at the kind of data you're collecting or your, HIV status, if I am talking about just knowing who my members are, then some information is not necessary. But if, for instance, the purpose for which I'm collecting that data is for donor purposes or charity purposes, because I understand that churches do charity activities. So we have a charity program, we do donations to needy families. Maybe we might need information concerning your financial accounts, okay? We might need your bank account, maybe a M-Pesa number, if there's need for us to transfer funds to you for charity purposes. So you need to understand, does this kind of information there's this kind of data that I want to collect and process from these members. Is it necessary for this purpose? So for you to get to data minimization, you must have defined purpose, all right? Then the next one is accuracy. Accuracy means whatever you personal data you're handling, you're collecting, you're processing must be accurate. Don't get my name wrong. Don't get my addresses wrong. Don't get my ID numbers wrong. It must be accurate. And that also entails allowing the data subject to rectify or erase inaccurate data. And that means, sometimes, like when churches, we are big members, we are rather signing up for membership into a church. So when the church collects information concerning you to put your name or into its database of church members, maybe you joined this church 5 years ago. And when you were joining, they were also asking you about your marital status. And at the time you were single. So according to the church database, it's still reading single. And actually, in so many cases, the churches never go back to their database to, revise the information. Has anything changed? So 5 years later, you got married, you have 3 kids, but the church database still reads single. That is an infringement, actually, of your rights of your data protection rights. It infringes the principle of accuracy. So you have a right to go back and ask that the record be rectified. And I'll give an example of a recent case. It's not related to churches, but there's a case where the NTSA denied someone a PSV badge. And the reason as to why he was denied the badge was because in his police clearance certificate, there was a record that he had once been charged with a traffic offense. However, he was actually acquitted of that traffic offense, but the records or the information on the police clearance certificate was never rectified to show that he was acquitted. So the NTSA denied him a PSV badge based on that information, and the tribunal found that that was an infringement of his right to data protection because he has a right to have the information about the person, about him, kept in a manner that is accurate and up to date. So the issue of up to date, updating your database. So is your church updating its database? If not, you might be on the wrong side of the law as far as the principle of accuracy is concerned. The other one is storage limitation. Don't keep data for longer than you need it, all right? So if you are participating in a program and you no longer participate in that program, and we collected certain information concerning you for purposes of that program, and that program ended, we don't need that information anymore. If it was a charity program, you're no longer part of that charity program, we no longer need some of that information that we needed to be able to accomplish that objective of the program. So storage limitation. Once the purpose has ended, you destroy that data, all right? So you just keep what is necessary. The other one is integrity and confidentiality. This means that whatever you are taking, that personal data from the data subject should be stored in a manner that is secure. There should be no data breach. It should not be stolen. It should not be accessed by unauthorized persons. We have one of the greatest data risks, and that is actually common in our countries. I don't know how many people have experienced this. You have received, especially during the elections period, you receive a text message from an aspirant in your village. I am vying for MCA. Kindly vote for me. I don't know how many of us have had that experience. You can just let me know. You're wondering, where did they get my number from? Why am I receiving campaign messages? Someone sold your information. To avoid that, you need to, organizations, including churches, are required to put in place safeguard and measures to ensure that that data is secure. It is not accessed by unauthorized persons. It is not destroyed. If it's physical documents, they are put in a place where, if it's cabinets or lockers, a place that is secure, because even destruction, damage, accidental loss that compromises the integrity of that data. All right. So integrity and confidentiality is very key. Accountability means that the church, the data controller, is responsible for demonstrating compliance. If the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner comes to do to do a visit in your church, would the church be found on the right side of the law? So you need to put in place appropriate measures to ensure compliance, and I'll leave that to my colleague Anita. Will talk about that. And in the next session, we are going to understand why it is necessary for churches to give attention, to give consideration to this issue of data protection. As we said, prevention is better than cure, as it is said rather. Prevention is better than cure.
Thank you for that wonderful overview of the Data Protection Act. So we'll proceed to the second half of our webinar, which will focus on how the Data Protection Act applies to the churches. So we're going to what do we mean by consent? So according to the Act, it means that it's a manifestation of the data subject's wishes that signifies an agreement from the data subject to have that data processed. It basically means you as the natural person, you as the individual, you have either by word of mouth or by written form, what are some of the elements or principles of consent? So number one, it has to be free. For example, your pastor cannot force you to give the consent, right, if you do not wish to. Number two, it has to be expressed. So it has to be, an example of an express consent is you either saying yes or no. Unequivocal would mean that this consent is clear. It's very clear that you as the data subject have given the consent to the organization. Specific, so yes, you as the individual have given this specific organization the consent to do something specified. So for example, if it's for the church, you're giving the information so that the church can be able to contact you, for example. And then informed. So for informed consent, this mostly applies from the point of the organization, the data collector or the data processor. They should tell you why they need your consent, right? Some of the emerging issues that is coming up is how can people, the organizations specifically, the entities, how can they report consent from the data subject? So one of the ways is just displaying a notice in a common area. So an example I can give of this is when you go to parking areas, right? You have the park at your own risk. And some schools now, in relation to data protection, they have a notice saying that as you enter this premises, as you enter this school, please be aware that you're going to use your images, right? Or your images might be reported. So that's what we mean by display notices in common areas. Forms, so you may be given a piece of paper asking for your name, your contact, and whether you agree to have your image or your information be taken and processed for, maybe they want to reach out to you for contact purposes, or maybe to market a place. And then wristbands. So this idea of wristbands was following some of the enforcement mechanisms by the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. So some of the clubs have issued wristbands to their patrons, such that if you wish to be given, if you wish to have your image shared, they'll know by the color of the wristband. Yeah. So after discussing briefly about consent, let's look at this question. So a church member has seen their photo on social media, like the one Njoki had earlier displayed. Do you think that this church member can sue the church for, for sharing their photo online? What do you guys think? Just let me know in the chat. And then the second question. So here we have a child in Sunday school reading the Bible. Let's assume a church has taken this photo and they want to just share about the good work they're doing. sharing the gospel. You think that one, this child can give the consent to have that picture shared, or two, that the parent can sue because the child did not give their consent. So just to bring these real life examples of how a lot of entities have found themselves in trouble with the Data Protection Commissioner because of sharing images without consent. So last year, in September 2023, we had the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner penalize some of these entities for lack of consent from data subjects. So we had Roma School, which was fined 4.55 million for posting the photo of a child without parental consent. Yeah. Then we also had a digital lender provider, Bula Pride Limited, being fined 2,975,000 for releasing the name and contact details of the complainants, who are natural people, individuals, to third parties. Another example, Machakos University was ordered by the High Court to pay one of the former students, Catherine Njeri, 700,000 for using Njeri's image without her consent to market the school. So they were fined. All that being said, how does the church fall under the ambit of the Data Protection Act? Churches collect a lot of information from their members and even the general public, starting from contact details of the members, your ID information, and they're getting, you want to join a church and they want to know you more, they might collect your national ID information. Even your bank account details might end up being collected by the church when they want to, during offertory or tithing, and even when they're trying to raise funds for church projects. So all this information that's being collected by the church makes them a data controller and a data processor under the Data Protection Act. Bearing that in mind, it means that the church, as a data controller and a data processor, needs to obtain consent from the data subject. In this case, the church members, maybe members of the public who are coming to interact with the church, be it in an event or a webinar being held by the church. The church will need to collect that consent as a requirement of the Data Protection Act. Then next we have all the data controllers and processors must be registered by the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. Yeah, and once you're registered with the Data Protection Commissioner, the law comes in to allow the Data Protection Commissioner to audit you, just to make sure that you're complying with the Data Protection Act. Bearing in mind that we've established that one, the church as a data controller and a data processor is subject to the Data Protection Act, and two, because they are data controllers and processors, they will need to obtain consent to use images, to use contact information, personal information, or even sensitive information, in whatever capacity that they need to use it for, they will fall under the Act. How can we ensure that churches remain compliant? Because prevention is better than cure. So the first thing is to have churches registered at the Office of the Data Protection Commissioner. So how registration is done is you apply to the Data Protection Commissioner to be registered as a data controller or a data processor. So number two, we can also ensure that as churches, the members and other persons who interact with the church give their consent. So some of the ways the church can record this consent, again, we go back to the earlier discussion, they can either have the display notices in the public area, so at the entrance of the church, at the parking lots, all those places, just to notify patrons that, hey, as you come into this church, please know that we might use your images in our social media places or on the internet just to market ourselves. And then three, when the church is collecting all this data and processing it, it is a very good idea to have it under a secure database. So this database should have encryption competent people who deal with the collecting and processing of the information. And this database should have restricted access to it. So not just anybody should be allowed to access the database of the church. Yeah, so those are some of the mechanisms that by law, data processors and data controllers must have, and in this case, the church should have in place. So we'll go through some of your responses under the chart. George Njoroge is asking, in a span of how long should churches consider updating data? And is a case scenario where members data gets its way to the wrong hand, what should the church do? So I'll start with the case scenario which George has. So under the regulations of the Data Protection Act, it's upon the data processor, in this case now the church, to ensure that they put in all the possible mechanisms to ensure that, number one, data did not get into the wrong hands. And so maybe number two, in the unfortunate event that it does enter into the wrong hands, the churches will be required to notify the data commission that, look, on this and this day, we had a breach, so the mechanisms we put in place to control the leaking of this information. And yeah, these are the subsequent steps that we will take. So you will be required as a church to notify the commissioner about this breach. To the first question, in a span of how long should churches consider updating data? Every so often. So as often as is possible, yeah.
The issue of if the data gets into the wrong hands, the church is obligated, if that happens, to report to the data commissioner, like Anita said, within 72 hours. And then the persons who are affected, the individuals who are affected by that data breach, should also be notified as soon as possible. You want to answer question for Anita? And allow you.
Yeah, let me just read it out and then we can respond. So Nick is asking, your computer returns from repairs done by a fundi. You discover that all your data has been lost. So he asks, is this a data violation? Under which provisions of the law, and what are the remedies?
I think the first question that you would want to ask yourself is your fundi considered a data controller or a data processor under the Act? Because the Act really contemplates of the people that are under the purview of the Act are the data processors and data controllers who are in their normal operations, in their normal running of their businesses, they are involved in getting personal data and processing it. So I would say that engagement between your computer fundi, in them repairing your machine, I wouldn't think they were engaging in data collection. I don't know. Maybe if something happened to their machine and they formatted it by mistake. As at now, considering the scope of the data protection, I wouldn't think that that kind of incidents would fall under the provisions of the Act. Maybe you can sue your fundi under breach of contract in a civil suit.
Thank you. I can see a comment from Magdalene Wangui. So she says, with social media, it is a no to using a minor's image, whether the parent has given the consent or not. The church has the duty to inform the church members about how they're going to use their images, how they're going to use their contact information on social media or marketing, or whatever purpose. They have to tell the members that they're going to use your images, your contact information for this and this purpose. And in relation to whether the use of the minor's image. So for the use for the minor's image, if I may clarify, unless the parent consents. So remember, we've just gone through the Roma issue. So if in the Roma issue, let me just go back to the slide. So the Roma School was fined the 4.55 million for posting the photo of a child without parental consent. It is very important to note that the law does not view children as capable of giving consent. So it is for their parent or guardian to give the consent. So if the parent allowed the school, in this instance, the Roma School, to use the image, then yes, they can use that image on social media, but the parent has to be told why they're using the image. So that's that clarification. For children, it is for the parents to give consent. And maybe they can also add, after this Roma School incident occurred, a lot of schools now issue forms of consent to the parents, allow them to use the image, whether it's in, making the school diaries or even marketing itself. A lot of schools now do ask for consent from the parents.
Thank you, Anita, for that session and for helping us to understand how churches feed into the Data Protection Act. And I think now we are more knowledgeable, we are more informed. Even I know not most of us here, or maybe not all of us here could be in church leadership. You are probably a member, but with that kind of information, you are better placed even to pass on this advice, to the people that are concerned, and also for you to understand your data rights and the protocols that need to be put in place, even in the church system. As I say, before the 2019 Act, there was the data protection, culture was not very robust. There was not a very robust or strict, there are not strict measures as to how organizations handle personal data. But as change comes in and laws come in, we must also position ourselves accordingly so that we don't get into trouble. I know, church, God is for us, the blood of Jesus, God is defending us, but you need to align with the law, even for God to defend you. So we can't be careless. We cannot be ignorant about what the law says about handling personal data, about the right to privacy, about safeguarding people's rights. I know, like I was sharing with my colleague that, some people previously didn't mind, you actually want to see your face on the church broadcast, like, yeah, I saw myself, people enjoy that kind of being on the limelight. When the church photographer that day focuses on you. Yeah, but we cannot go with that, all right? As the churches, we cannot just say people actually enjoy these things that they don't mind. With the law will catch up with you, all right? The law will catch up with you. And as people even get more informed about their right to privacy, it's more important, it becomes important for the church to align so they don't get into trouble. Not everyone has a very clean intention. Someone could, like, I don't know who said that with this information now I know I can sue. So as people even get more and more enlightened about their rights, people just feel like this is an opportunity for me to, to sue this organization for using my image without my consent. And you will get into trouble as a church and you will have no defense. You will not say this is how we've been doing things and people don't mind. It's good that as churches, we streamline our system. Someone is saying, good afternoon, does posting a notice in the church that services are being recorded and streamlined online exonerates the church? Now, there's what Anita says, that general, disclaimers that you put there, like when you're walking to a building and you're told this building is under 24-hour CCTV surveillance. As I said, also the legal basis, under the legal basis for data processing, one of them was legitimate interest. Another one was public interest. So in the case of CCTV, I don't need every person who's walking into my premises to sign somewhere that it's okay, you can take my CCTV footage. There's a legitimate or interest. There's a lawful basis for me taking footage of your presence and your images within my premises, which is security. When it comes to church and now you're told, can that same principle apply, or that concept of just putting a general notice? To some extent, yes, but we can reinforce the consent, because at the core of data protection is the individual's personal right, the right to privacy. So we can reinforce that by having, like what Anita was saying, maybe formal ways of doing that. Maybe the way you can just have people sign somewhere that I allow myself, I am getting into this premises, well knowing that my photos, my images of myself will be taken through these services and it will be used for online broadcasting. And if in the normal operations of church, there is live broadcasting, that is also a legitimate interest. Okay. So if you come into this, if you come and sit into this church and our church is online, you know, we are live on YouTube, we are live on television. It is part of how the business operates or the running of the affairs of this organization. It is part of it. So I would say that there would be a lawful basis, which is legitimate interest, because consent is important, but it is not the only basis, the only lawful basis for data processing. If you would restrict that, that would make it impossible for churches or any other organization to run its normal operations. Okay. So there's so much that we have not delved into, but in case your church would want a deeper understanding of these things, a deeper assistance into working into the compliance journey, you feel free to get in touch with us. We'll be glad to work with you the compliance journey so that you don't get into trouble. As we said from the beginning, the essence of this is to prevent, because prevention is better than cure. We have said that to the realization that they are implicated by the Data Protection Act when things go wrong, right? Someone has said that All Saints has draft data protection policy, but we shall reach out. Yeah, thank you so much, George Minor, for that. We'll be so much willing to come and help you, not even just with the data protection privacy now that you already have a draft one. We can do trainings for the members of the church, for the members of the staff, for your ushers who are at the door taking people's names and all that. So we are available to do trainings, capacity building, yes, to help you understand how to apply it within your context, and even to understand how you can put in specific mechanisms for your context, yeah, for your church that will ensure that you are compliant. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again. See you next time.